We'll get started. My name is Ian Goldberg. I'm the Deputy Auditor Controller here at Solano County, and I work in the Internal Audit Division. And I'd like to introduce my partner in the project, Michele Harris. She's the Deputy Director for First 5 Solano Families Commission. And so we're here tonight to talk to you a little bit about our research project, which is titled Centralizing Administration Functions, a case study analysis in contract administration functions in Solano County. It's a bit of a mouthful. So, but bear with us. We're gonna talk you through it. Try to give you the key points here. So the way the presentation is going to go is I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'll talk about the literature review, get into the research methodology, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michele. She's going to share the key results and findings, talk about our recommendations, and then she'll flip it back to me to talk about some areas for further study that we've come up with, and then close it down and hopefully answer very few questions. So let's get started. Talking about our background, I think it's important that we give you just a brief framework on the county, on contract administration, and on contracts and how they're administered in Solano County before we dive in. So Solano County, again, this is brief, but we consist of 19 departments. You're actually in our biggest building. We have roughly an annual budget of $760 million, and we have approximately 2,500 employees. So that gives you a sense of the organization that you're in today. What is contract administration? I pulled a definition from the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, which kind of sums it up, I think, good. So I'm going to deliver that to you, which is that contract administration involves those activities performed by government officials after a contract has been awarded to determine how well the government and the contractor perform to meet the requirements of the contract. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a flavor. So how do we do that in Solano County? Well, in Solano County, we manage contracts in what we consider a decentralized environment, which is essentially that each individual department is responsible for managing their own contracts. So that gives you an idea of how that's done. So why study contracts? Why look at contracts? Well, there's a couple things that I wanted to point out. One is that contracting's big in Solano County. We currently, if you look at contracts that are active, and this is multi-year contracts, and there's a lot of information behind this, it's not easy to get your hands around the data, but we have roughly 600 contracts, and again, this is multi-year, and the multi-year total is $190 million. That's an estimate. But that gives you an idea of the size, the number of contracts, the amount of contracts that are managed in the county. It's big business, and it's important to the way we do business and the way we deliver services. So in addition, I wanted to point out the economic downturn. This is important to us because as a county, we're changing. We've undergone significant change in the recent years as we try to right size. And with right size, we've got downsizing of staff. We've also combined services amongst departments. And so we're constantly looking at how we can streamline things. And contracting, being as big a part of it is the county, it's important to consider that as we look to the future. So let's talk about our research hypothesis. So what we came up with when we started to talk about contracting is that centralizing contract administration functions in Solano County will result in increased efficiencies and accountabilities. And beyond that, we looked at some sub-questions. And so as we flushed the idea out, we came up with if centralization does occur, what functions would you centralize? All of them? None of them? Some of them? What efficiencies can be gained by centralization? And how would centralization result in increased accountability? So these are some of the questions we had in the back of our mind as we worked through our project. Literature. There is a great deal of literature from a wide range of sources that we've explored. For example, and I can only touch on a few because we have 15 minutes, and boy, I could be here all night talking about the literature. But for example, in the decision to centralize versus decentralize, we consider David Osborne and Peter Plastrik's Reinventor's Fieldbook, which is a great guide on how to transform your government. In looking at best practices, there were a number of sources, but Stephen Kelman and his ideas on the importance of management's role in contract administration really hit home for us and touched in the study. And then I wanted to point out other agencies, because as part of our study, we looked at other agencies in a number of different ways, but through the literature as well. And we looked at a number of different counties and how they do contract administration and the successes and the failures that they've had. And so things like counties up in Oregon, Multnomah County, Los Angeles County down in LA, Yuba County, a number of counties we focused on as well to try to get it closer to home. So the information we gathered across the board was taken into consideration as we developed our results and findings. So let's talk about our research methodology. I like the graph. Michele came up with this, so I have to give her credit for it. But it's a great visual about how our study came together. So essentially we've got 3 different avenues that we went after in terms of our research. And they all funnel down into our results and findings and then ultimately conclusions. conclusions. So I'm going to talk about each of them just briefly because we only have a few minutes. And so the surveys was the first piece of it. What we did is we went out to the 5 largest counties, the 5 largest departments who do contracting in the county. And so we zeroed in on those areas, and we surveyed the contract administrators in those counties. So we sent our surveys out, asked a number of questions about centralization, contract administration, different functions. So we gathered that data. Then we have our key informant interviews. We went after 8 key executives in the county, from the county administrator down to the auditor controller and in between with legal counsel, etc. And so we zeroed in on the key places where contract administration really happens from a policy level. And we talked with them about the key things in contract administration here in Solano County. And then finally we did best practice interviews. I mentioned we went to other agencies. Well, we also went out and interviewed. And we looked at those agencies that were doing good work in centralization. And we looked at their models and we talked about what their successes and failures were. And so all of this data comes together into what we consider our results and findings. And so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Michele to talk to you a little bit about those results and findings. Michele?
Thanks, Ian. So we collected a plethora of rich data, and what I'm going to do is go over the highlights of the data to give you a broad idea of the key takeaways from this research project. First, I want to point out that Solano County does a lot of things right when it comes to contract administration. We have a contract template. The contract template is plug and play. It eliminates a lot of the guesswork for the contract managers. We have a legal sufficiency review. Now, the legal sufficiency review doesn't only look at whether or not the contract is legally sufficient, but it also looks at whether or not the contract answers key questions. Does the contract get you what you want? We have a contract policy and procedure manual. This is heavily referenced by staff. We have delegations of authority in place, and we provide contracts training to our staff. And finally, I want to point out that our contract administrators report that they feel supported and have adequate resources to do their job. So those are some of the strengths that we found out in this project. Of course, there are some challenges that go along with that and contract administration. Most notably, there's a lack of a central database to track contract information. And this is connected to another challenge that was noted during our data collection, and that's a lack of policy oversight. So a lack of a big picture look at contracting. Our current contracting process is heavily paper dependent. Although there are available contracts training, staff are hungry for more. And many contract administrators don't perform some basic functions that are associated with effective contract management. For example, conducting site visits or receiving and reviewing routine performance reports from their contractors. So when you take a look at our hypothesis, thank you, that centralization of some contract administration functions would increase efficiency and accountability, we're saying yes, and I'll take you through why we say that. One of the questions we asked the respondents in our survey was to answer whether or not they thought a database of all contracts in Solano County would make contract management, all of these things, more transparent, easier to identify duplication of services, easier to create economies of scale, easier to analyze budget and performance measures, more efficient, easier to report to state and feds, more accountable, and easier to administer contracts. We set an agreement threshold of 70%, and you can see from the chart here that overwhelmingly respondents believe that a database of all contracts in Solano would make contract management all of these things. So we know that a database of all contracts would assist in contract management. The question then becomes, what part of contract administration needs to be centralized to make contracting more efficient and more accountable? Well, we asked that question too, and the respondents had ideas about that as well. So we asked the respondents to identify what functions should be centralized. You can see on the chart here the functions that we showed them. The results of our study support both centralized and decentralized functions. The top part of the chart, you can see tracking of contract insurance, tracking of all contracts, and providing training on contract issues were all identified as tasks that should be done in a centralized manner if we're looking to maximize efficiency and accountability. The respondents thought that some activities should stay decentralized, and those are the remainder of those tasks. They are facilitation of contract review, processing of contract changes and amendments, monitoring of contract terms and conditions, review and approval of contractor invoices, and verification of performance measures. So the response to this question parallels the data we collected in the best practice interviews. Other government agencies that have centralized contract administration functions report that decentralized management of the scopes of work and budgets is the preferred approach. They concur that the actual pieces of work that are being done are best managed at the department level, which is closest to where the work is actually happening. So, what did all this data ultimately tell us? Ian and I have concluded, based upon the data that we collected, that Solano County needs to do all of these things here to make contracting more efficient and more accountable. First, we're recommending that Solano County create a centralized contracting function. This function would develop and maintain a contracts database, monitor and manage insurance requirements, track contract information. It has the potential to reduce a paper-dependent process and provide policy-level reports. So we're recommending that this idea be referred to Solano County's Shared Services Committee for consideration and possible implementation. Second, Solano County needs to build upon the good work that it already does with its trainings and provide additional regular trainings to contracts administrators. What we heard in our survey was that contract administrators would like training on topics such as how to write an effective performance measure, how to discern the difference between a process measure and a performance measure. I have to close out a contract. What does that mean? How do I do that? Third, Solano County should update its contracting and purchasing policy manual. This manual is a rich resource to staff, but it's outdated. By providing the most up-to-date instructions and information to staff, Solano County could further protect itself from liability, identify gaps that need to be filled, and additionally, a review of the manual is a great opportunity to revisit items that may be outdated, such as delegations of authority limits for contracting. And lastly, we're recommending that along with a database that tracks all contracts, Solano should also research the potential to utilize an e-system to manage workflow processes for contract approvals. In particular, I want to highlight the case of Multnomah County, Oregon. In that county, they saw a greatly increased efficiency with an e-system for contract workflow processes. Under their old system, it used to take 30 days to move a contract through the approval process. With centralization and an e-system, 5 days. So big efficiency right there. I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation back over to Ian, who will go over areas for further study and wrap up.
Let's see. So areas for further study. As we close it down here, we did want to point out a few things. There was a number of areas we came across when we completed our research that we felt required further study or warranted further study. And so, you know, this is one of the interesting things about research is it often generates more questions as you dive in. So we have a few that we pointed out. One is the dollar amount and number of contracts assigned to each individual contract manager, and analyzing and deciding what the best measure is for how that job gets done. We had input into suggestions on efficiency weren't valued by supervisors. That came back in our survey, and we thought that that was some interesting data that required diving in a little further to see how we're treating efficiency recommendations from our staff. And then finally, defining gaps that exist within the Solano County contracting rule. We did get a lot of good information back in our survey in regards to the gaps and areas that would be areas for further study. So with that, we're going to be recommending those areas as well. Now we get to the conclusion, questions, answers, but before I do, just to sum it up, there are opportunities to build upon the great things we do in Solano County in contracting. You know, to increase our efficiency and accountability, we believe these recommendations and this research project should strongly be considered for implementation. So on behalf of Michele and myself, I'd like to thank not only all of you for being here and painfully getting through it with us, but as well as all the survey respondents we received, all the department heads and executives that participated in our surveys. They took time out of their day. It's a big process to go through together all this data. It takes a lot of time, not only our time, but everybody's time. So we did want to make sure that we We gave recognition for that. And with that, thank you. We'd be happy to answer any questions.